Okay, picture this. It's World War II. Deep in Japanese-occupied Manchuria, there's a secret facility, basically the size of a small city. And inside, some of the most horrific acts in human history were being committed, all in the name of science. We're going to dive into the story of a nightmare factory the world tried very hard to forget. Unit 731. Just listen to that. That's a quote from a former medical assistant at the unit. It cuts right to the bone, doesn't it? It shows you the terrifying human reality of what was happening. These weren't just abstract experiments on paper. They were performed on living, breathing, conscious people. So that leads us to the big question we're tackling here. It's not just about what happened, but how the truth was so systematically buried. Why did the men responsible for all of this just walk free? Let's get into it. On the surface, it had a totally harmless, almost bureaucratic name: the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. I mean, that sounds helpful, right? But that benign title was the perfect cover for Japan's top secret biological warfare program. And when we say this place was massive, we mean massive. We're talking about a 6 square kilometer complex. It had over 150 buildings, labs, prison cells, even its own crematoriums. More than 3,000 people worked there: scientists, doctors, military personnel, and every single one of them was bound by an oath of absolute silence. So you have to ask yourself, how does a place like this even get created? Where does an idea this monstrous come from? Well, to understand that, we need to look at the man who was its chief architect. Meet Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii. He was a top army medical officer, a brilliant microbiologist. After studying chemical and biological warfare in Europe following World War I, he became completely obsessed with the idea that diseases could be the ultimate weapon. Invisible killers that could wipe out entire armies without ever destroying buildings or infrastructure. So here's how it all fell into place. The invasion of Manchuria in 31 gave Ishii the perfect location. It was far from Japan, and it had a ready supply of human test subjects from the occupied population. Then, in 1936, with the emperor's blessing, the unit became official. And by 1940, it was already unleashing its horrific creations on civilian population. This next part is, well, it's key to understanding how any of this was psychologically possible for the people working there. They didn't call their victims people, or prisoners, or patients. They called them Maruta. It means logs, and that dehumanizing code name was absolutely crucial. It turned human beings into raw material, you see? Pieces of wood to be chopped up, studied, and then burned. So what exactly did they do to these Maruta? The experiments were nothing less than a methodical catalog of torture, a real-life encyclopedia of human agony written in blood. Okay, so their number one mission was to perfect biological weapons. They designed bombs to drop plague-infested fleas. They tested anthrax on prisoners who were tied to stakes in open fields. They deliberately contaminated wells in food supplies. And to see exactly how these diseases destroyed the body, they performed vivisections, dissecting living victims without any anesthesia, just to watch the damage to their internal organs in real time. But the cruelty didn't stop there. They conducted frostbite experiments where they would freeze a person's limbs solid and then hit them with clubs to see what would happen. They used prisoners as live targets to test grenades and flamethrowers. And in some of the most twisted acts, surgeons would just remove organs, a stomach, part of a brain, simply to see how long a person could survive without it, all while the victim was wide awake. And this horror wasn't just contained inside the facility. The weapons they perfected were actually used against Chinese cities. Conservative estimates, and I mean conservative, suggest that these attacks killed over 200,000 civilians by spreading plague, cholera, and anthrax. And that staggering number doesn't even include the thousands who died inside the camp itself. Then, in August 1945, as Soviet forces were closing in on Manchuria, Ishii knew the war was lost. His focus shifted instantly from creating death to erasing every single trace of it. Ishii had a 4-step plan to make it all disappear. First, he ordered the execution of every single remaining prisoner, no witnesses. Second, he had thousands of documents and lab samples burned or buried. Third, the main buildings were blown up. But, and this is the crucial part, he didn't destroy everything. He kept the most valuable research data because he knew it could be his ticket to survival. And this is where the story takes its most disturbing turn. After the war, you had Nazi doctors who performed their own horrific experiments, and they faced the gallows at the Nuremberg trials. But the doctors of Unit 731, Ishii used his data as a bargaining chip with the United States. In a secret deal, he and his entire top staff were given full immunity from prosecution in exchange for their research. This deal was so secret that even the judges at the main Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal were kept completely in the dark. Years later, when one of those judges, Judge Rawling, found out the truth, he expressed just how bitter he was. Justice, it turned out, had been traded for intelligence. A deal like that, a deal for silence, doesn't just go away. It had catastrophic consequences that have echoed for decades, poisoning international relations and leaving behind this legacy of injustice. I mean, just look at the fallout. Politically, Japan's official denial of these events soured relations with its neighbors for generations. Ethically, it set a terrifying precedent that war criminals could get away with it if their data was valuable enough. Scientifically, data born from torture was actually used in America's own bioweapons program. And for the victims' families, it meant a lifetime of pain, of being disbelieved with no closure and no justice. So let's be really clear about this. The monsters of Unit 731 weren't punished. They were protected. Shiro Ishii died a free man. Many of his top researchers went on to have distinguished careers in medicine, in business, in academia, their dark secrets buried by a cold geopolitical bargain. And that leaves us with this final haunting question, doesn't it? The story of Unit 731 forces us to confront a really uncomfortable truth about power and memory and justice. It reminds us that sometimes silence can be just as violent as the act it conceals.